So he's essentially saying, without spelling it out, that Resident Evil 9 is going to be open world. This is speculation because there's no evidence that this is actually going to happen. You know, there's several games that have the ability, the engine of a game to actually be able to be open world, but they just don't make it open world. So again, speculation. And one thing that's funny about this guy that I'll just point out that I've stated for several years now is that this guy loves to make educated guesses, and he actually says it right here. So in today's video, we're actually going to be going over another kind of reason as to why you should not trust Resident Evil leakers. Recently, a well-known Resident Evil leaker, roughly around like 3 weeks ago, kind of exposed himself as somebody who doesn't really know or doesn't really have any information at all, since he recently contradicted himself when somebody called them out and ended up doubling down on the previous tweet. Yeah, so we're gonna actually go over the details, but before we get started, I do want to preface the video by stating that this problem with Resident Evil leaks has been going around, and it's been kind of getting worse and worse since I would say Resident Evil 4 Remake, which released in 2023. Previous to that, we got so much garbage leaks and so many people fell for it. Even during that time when I actually started my channel, I was actually telling a lot of people, don't believe leaks, don't do it. So if anything, I do have to mention that the blame doesn't all go towards this one leaker. You have to remember that there's a lot of people out there that love to foment, aka they love to promote and encourage these types of fake leaks to be able to get some clout. There's a lot of YouTubers out there that post a lot of these leaks, not only YouTubers, TikTokers, Twitter users, and even gaming articles that are guilty of promoting not just this guy's leaks, but also several other leaks that leakers that supposed leakers that ended up being completely false. So anyways, all that to say that I don't encourage hate, so don't hate on any of these people. I'm not hating on this guy that we're going to be talking about today. And frankly, I don't respect people that intentionally promote fake rumors as if they're actually true. Like if you ever hear a Resident Evil YouTuber, TikToker, whatever social media dude that says, take it with a grain of salt, you know, throw it out in the garbage. Do not listen to that at all. Turn off the video, get out. The person is obviously just smoking copium. But anyways, let's get started with what I wanted to say. So back in January 22nd, Aesthetic Gamer actually said that there's a screenshot of something I said that'll probably float around, I predict. So gonna say it, Jill doesn't play any major role in RE9. Unfortunately, this current hospital rumor floating around is 100% BS, crushing the Jill hopium now before wrong expectations are set. So funny enough, this is actually another rumor, another Resident Evil fake leak out there that was saying that the Resident Evil 9 was going to be in a hospital in, what was it, Singapore, something along those lines. I did cover it in a recent video, so I actually went over all of the huge fake rumors out there that people were promoting. So it's funny that he actually said this around January 22nd, but what we're going to be discussing today is something that a follower of his actually posted. They said, I know probably you won't see this. I don't really care if you do, but I have to get this off my chest, and it spans in a couple of tweets below. This Jill hopium, these expectations, they were started by you. You started all of this back in 2021. And sure enough, she actually calls him out with evidence, mind you, of him saying this in the Discord server. I really shouldn't say this. Please, oh please, just keep this in the servers. But what I'll say is in one of the two Resident Evil games on this list, either what I think Outrage may be or Apocalypse, Jill has a prominent role. So kind of just to break down what he's saying here, if you guys are unfamiliar, back in 2020, there was an actual 100% verified actual leak that happened at Capcom headquarters. Basically happened on the 2020 on November 20th, I believe. I think it was 12th or maybe 20th. Correct me if I'm wrong. But basically some hackers went in and basically leaked a bunch of files from Capcom's database. But what was interesting about that data leak is that we actually saw actual project names of what Capcom was working on at the time of 2020 and of November. The projects that they were working on was obviously Resident Evil 4 Remake. We knew that. We knew Resident Evil Village because it was just going to be released the following year or following couple of months, because Village did release on May, if I'm not mistaken, right? I think the 21st, correct me if I'm wrong. And we knew that Resident Evil Outrage and Resident Evil Apocalypse was on like they were expected to release, or that the Capcom was essentially going to be working on them. They did kind of have time dates. on the call, like on this call sheet, as to when it was actually going to be released. So a lot of people kind of ran with this and assumed that Apocalypse was going to be some sort of game that had that was going to be Resident Evil 9. Even though there was no information that actually stated this, most people just put 2 and 2 together that was going to happen. So it's funny that, you know, right around this time, this is 2021, he basically said that, oh, Jill is going to be in both Outrage and Apocalypse. The thing that I find hilarious is that he ended up getting caught by this. Now, I was going to verify this by going maybe on the Discord server, but I didn't have to, because if we actually go down, he actually responds. So this person continued by saying, I've spent the last 4 years thinking that Jill might be in Resident Evil 9 because of something you said. And believe me, that's got me through some very bad days and nights, no matter how bad things got. I just told myself, well, at least Jill might be in Resident Evil 9. Okay, that's a little excessive, but whatever. Okay, this is just extra. And now, like you always do, you flip-flop once again. And now suddenly Jill's not in Resident Evil 9. She never was. I don't think you know how excited us Jill fans were to think that she might be in finally returning after 15 years. And you just let us all think it for 4 years. Again, I know you don't care. I know you want some attention. You've admitted as much, but I think you need to do some reflecting. Stop saying things you don't mean. Stop getting people excited to just flip-flop like you always do. You always say, oh, I'm done with leaking, blah, 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 yet you keep doing it. I really wish you would, because if you had, I wouldn't have spent the last 4 years thinking Jill was in RE9 only to be crushed. Again, I know you won't see this. Even if you do, you won't care. There'll be some BS reason as to how things change. This was that, etc. The usual things you always say to cover yourself. Maybe try taking accountability for some time, though. Okay, this was worded perfectly, by the way. As mentioned, like this was worded perfectly because this person did call Aesthetic Gamer out very well. They basically said, oh, I'm done with leaking. This is something that this particular person is always doing. He's always like, I'm done with Twitter. I'm done. I'm out. And then he goes and starts leaking. I'm done with leaking. And then he goes up to his Discord server, and then he goes back to Twitter, and then he goes back to his Discord server. And it's just a whole ring around the rosy kind of a thing. So honestly, yeah, this was hilarious when I first saw this. By the way, the reason I didn't cover this when it was actually happening, because I did get notified as this when it did, is mostly due to the fact that I was actually moving, new studio. Anyways, but going back to what I was saying, what's funny here is the reason I didn't have to verify this is because he actually admits this. He says it was true then, it isn't now. I really not anymore complicated. I wouldn't be surprised in the future when RE9 comes out and they show concept art that they might show early drafts of the game had Jill. Okay, so this is something that I actually recently talked about last month in my Resident Evil in 2025. There was something that I stated in that video. I basically said that these leaks are going to get worse. That's my prediction, just like what happened pre-Resident Evil 4 remake. So as soon as we actually get a trailer for Resident Evil 9, the next Resident Evil, there's going to be so many leaks that are going to pop out. No joke. This is my prediction. But one thing that I mentioned is that there's an argument that I've heard, even people that really respect Aesthetic Gamer and whatever, Dusk Golem, whatever you want to call him, had them in my chat specifically kind of bring this argument up. And it's definitely copium. One bad argument that I keep hearing, I've seen people state that games are always changing while they're being developed. So the leaker might not be lying. So basically their argument is that when companies are working, Capcom is working on a game, maybe the leak that was leaked 2 years ago, like with the American thing and all of that, maybe that was what Resident Evil 9 was back in the day. Maybe, those leaks were actually true. And so you can't say that, maybe the leaker was right. So it kind of just gives the benefit of the doubt to the leakers. But the problem with this argument, and the reason why it's a poor argument, is because we actually don't have facts to actually defend. Like, for example, Resident Evil 4's development. We don't know the development process of Resident Evil 4. Now, could you go and ask a dev team and ask him like, hey, was Hookman ever up on the table? Was Krauser not being in the game on the table? Was Luis section on the table? Was Leon going into paintings and like hallucinating like Resident Evil 3.5? Was that ever on the table? There's no evidence for any of that. There's no facts. There's never been a dev that's actually stated that. If anything, we actually had the director and the producer for RE4 kind of state that no, the Hookman is not in Resident Evil 4, because that question was getting brought up a lot during that time in an interview that one gaming article actually had with those guys. So again, this is a poor argument. It's not a good argument, mostly due to the fact that there's nothing that kind of suggests that that's what's happening. That what leakers say 2 years ago might have been true. If anything, it just gives the benefit of the doubt for leakers. And the reason also that it's not a good argument, if you actually believe this poor argument that leakers are actually telling the truth and that the reason that their leaks were wrong is because the game developers changed it, then logically one would actually ascertain, you would put two and two together that, oh, then that means I can't believe any leaks. If the leaks are ever changing, if they're always being, like if the development idea of a game is always being changed, then why would you believe leaks? So again, this is why it's a very poor argument. First off, as Byrus was saying, it's a cop-out. And then next, if you actually believe this, truly believe this, then you wouldn't believe any of the leaks. It's just illogical for you to do that. Because if it's ever changing, if it's never consistent, then why would you listen to them? Why would you even give them the time of day, right?
Yeah, you're kind of proving your own argument as invalid. But
it kind of collapses on itself. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So basically, waiting until RE9 comes out and then show concept art that might show early drafts of the game that had Jill. This whole thing is such a cop out because he doesn't have it now. He can't show us anything. The other thing that I have to state too, that makes absolutely no sense. And by the way, if you guys enjoy these kind of breakdowns where I kind of look at how silly these rumors can be, then make sure to leave a like. It actually helps out a ton. But anyways, let's continue on. Is that he specifically says that when RE9 comes out and they show concept art, they might show early drafts of the game had Jill. Now, the problem with this is that if we actually go back to 2021, he says that what I'll say is one of the two Resident Evil games on this list, either Outrage or Apocalypse, Jill has a prominent role. So it's funny because back in 2021, he didn't specify that it was actually Resident Evil 9. And as I stated earlier on in the video, we actually don't know if Resident Evil Apocalypse, we know that Capcom was working on Resident Evil Apocalypse, but we don't 100% know that that's going to be Resident Evil 9. Another thing too worth noting is that a couple months ago, we actually had that Capcom Next event where Resident Evil 7 director said, hey, I'm going to be directing the new Resident Evil game. And a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, it's going to be Resident Evil 9, Resident Evil 9. Wait a second, we don't know if that's going to be Resident Evil 9. You have to remember that, guess what? That specific director for Resident Evil 7 also directed Revelations, which was a spin-off game. And if we look here, what's the other game that was actually leaked in the 2020 Capcom data leak? It's actually Resident Evil Outrage. So what could that entail? Well, as I stated in my previous video for Resident Evil in 2025, it could be, like, we don't know, but it could be that the next Resident Evil Apocalypse or Resident Evil Outrage isn't even Resident Evil 9. It could be a different spin-off game. And in fact, another thing that I will also say is that when Outrage came out, like when the data leak happened, there was also a lot of rumors that were attached to Outrage that kind of suggested that Outrage was going to be a Resident Evil multiplayer. And then there was another rumor that also suggested that Resident Evil Outrage was going to be Revelations 3. And that was the name of the game, Outrage. Mind you, another thing that we also know that I should also mention is that we also knew from the Capcom data leak that Capcom was working on a game called Resident Evil Hunku, aka the Japanese way of saying Resident Evil Hunk. Hunk was going to get his own game. We actually had concrete evidence to support that. So, but again, going back to my point, do we know that Resident Evil 9 is going to be the next game? No, we have no evidence of this. And he also kind of contradicts himself here by saying that we don't know, like whether it's Outrage or Apocalypse, Jill has a prominent role. So this right here is a clear contradiction from Aesthetic, aka Dusk Golem. And since we're kind of talking about this specific leaker in general, he also in February 12th, just a couple days ago, he did actually go out and kind of just reiterate a lot of the stuff that he said in the past, kind of answered questions very vaguely like he always does. But it's funny, he didn't say nothing new. Like this was always an educated guess. And it's funny that he kind of alludes to that. Like for example, here he says, I'm going to talk facts for a second rather than speculate. Okay. He says, so RE9 is built on RE Resident Evil tech that Dragon's Dogma and Monster Hunter Wilds are using. In fact, all three of them were greenlit together to take advantage of the open world dynamic gameplay system tech that was needed for DD2. So here, right here, it's interesting that he states that it's a fact, when in reality, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a fact. Obviously, this is, again, speculation. And the reason it's speculation, as I've stated before in my previous videos, that he says that, greenlit together to take advantage of the open world dynamic gameplay system. So he's essentially saying, without spelling it out, that Resident Evil 9 is going to be open world. This is speculation because there's no evidence that this is actually going to happen. You know, there's several games that have the ability, the engine of a game to actually be able to be open world, but they just don't make it open world. So again, speculation. Later on in the tweet, he starts, speculating again. RE9 has taken longer than Capcom would have wanted. Factors like the pandemic, the game got delayed and dev, and it's really gunning. Again, this is all speculation. None of this is fact. He's talked about RE9 being a huge game, even though we don't know that RE9 is the next game. And one thing that's funny about this guy that I'll just point out that I've stated for several years now is that this guy loves to make educated guesses. And he actually says it right here. So one guy asked him, do you think we'll get a reveal this year at least though? And it's funny because he says, so keep in mind right now, I don't know Capcom's marketing plans and I usually only get a better post if something's releasing soon, the weeks leading up to the things happening. Oh, okay. So this is an educated speculation, but still speculation on my side. I do think Resident Evil is likely to be revealed this year, but I think it might be revealed even later this summer, maybe late year. So right there, did he just say that he actually knows when something is like about to happen, that's when he knows? Is that really like the sources that he has, the supposed sources? So everything else is an educated speculation. Anyways, you know what? That's a lot. That's all I'll have to say about that guy. I don't want to keep going and reading a lot of his educated speculation. Honestly, it's the only reason I'm making this video is just to let you guys know that this is all just nonsense, right? Don't listen to Resident Evil leakers. Don't even give them the time of day. The only reason I'm doing this is because there's still people out there that are falling for Resident Evil leaks. Don't do it. Don't listen to them, whether it's on TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, whatever. Don't do it, boys. By the way, if you guys enjoyed these types of videos where we actually go over rumors, we kind of break them down and see how silly they are, click this video right here where I actually went over a bunch of them. But anyways, thank you so much for watching.